In the next video in our series looking at eukaryotic cell structure, we're going to look at the structures found on the outside of a cell that are primarily used for the protection of what is inside of the cell. And we're going to start by moving away from animals and looking at the cell types involved in organisms that can perform photosynthesis, that of course being plants, as well as organisms that share similarities with mushrooms, that being what we call fungi, the individual word being fungus. Now, what plants and fungi have in common that makes them different from animals is that unlike animals that have a skeleton of some kind, so humans have their skeleton on the inside, that's our bone structure, and arthropods such as insects, arachnids, and crustaceans actually have an exoskeleton that is found outside of their bodies, but plants and fungi do not have any skeleton of any kind. And so they need a system that gives them the structural stability, that being the ability to stand up straight and not actually fall over or melt into a puddle of jello that animals use their skeletons for. And that structure in plants and fungi are what we call cell walls, which we find on the outermost layer of the cell outside of their cell membrane. Now, plants and fungi are actually distinct organisms because fungi are actually heterotrophic organisms, meaning that unlike plants that absorb sunlight to make their own sugar, fungi actually need to break down other organisms, usually organisms that are dead, in order to consume enough energy to be able to survive. Now, because they are distinct organisms, their cell walls are actually different structures as well. For example, plants have a sugar-based cell wall, which is made out of a complex type of sugar molecule called cellulose, whereas fungi rely on a different molecule also based on sugar, which is pronounced chitin. Now, even though the chemical structure of cellulose and of chitin is very, very different, they serve a similar purpose when humans eat them. Now, you'd be mistaken if you thought that cellulose tasted sweet, but we can easily prove that this is wrong, because if you were to take the bite out of a leafy green vegetable such as spinach, lettuce, cabbage, or kale, most people would not describe it tasting sweet. Now, the reason why it doesn't taste sweet is that humans, as well as pretty much every animal, cannot actually digest cellulose. We don't have the ability to break this chemical down, and the same goes with chitin. Now, that doesn't mean that eating plant cells or fungal cells is useless, far from it, because both cellulose and chitin serve as dietary fiber, which basically means that both of these cell wall structures will go through the human digestive system, and because they can't be broken down, they will actually push all of the undigested food out of the digestive system, allowing our digestive systems to become more clean as a result of eating them. So even though we can't get any energy out of eating the cell walls of plants or fungi, doesn't mean that they are useless, and doesn't mean that we can just stop eating a healthy diet of plants and mushrooms. Now, even though animal cells do not have cell walls, animals, plants, fungi, as well as every other cell that exists, definitely needs a cell membrane, because the cell membrane is the primary layer of protection for every single cell, whether it be a prokaryotic bacterium or a eukaryotic animal cell, such as our human cells. And the primary way that cell membranes protect the inside of the cell and all of the organelles and DNA within is that they ultimately control which substances are able to get in or out of the cell. And the way that they do this is by using a series of proteins that exists on the cell membrane, and these proteins are able to control which substances are able to get in and which substances should preferentially get out. Another function of the cell membrane is that as the outermost layer of the cell. This is the part that is involved in the communication with cells in other parts of the body. For example, cells in your brain need to be able to send instructions to cells in other parts of your body, and they do this primarily by releasing chemicals that are used to send signals called hormones. And when hormones reach the cell membrane, they tell the cell membrane to send a signal into the cell and cause various changes to happen inside. And this phenomenon will be explored in future biology grades. But one of the other most important functions of the cell membrane is a form of identification. You can think of the cell membrane as like your driver's license or your passport if you're ever pulled over by police. Now, your immune system needs to be able to identify that your cells belong to you and that they are not dangerous foreign cells such as bacteria that exist to make you sick. And there are specific structures on the surface of the cell membrane that act as very specific identification so that the white blood cells of your immune system understand that this cell should be in the human body and isn't a foreign cell that is there to make you sick. In the next video, we're going to look at a large family of organelles inside of the cell membrane that are connected both structurally and functionally to both the nucleus and the cell membrane themselves.